My brother lifted his glass at Christmas dinner and said the prayer our mother always loved. Halfway through, he stopped, looked straight at me, and changed his tone. "Some people at this table know how to build a life," he said. "Others are just very talented at hanging around." The laugh that followed came in small polite bursts, the kind people use when they want cruelty to pass as humor. My plate was still empty. I had not even sat down. My niece was setting out the rolls. My brother's wife stared at the gravy boat as if silver could save her from embarrassment. And my mother, who had watched him bulldoze every room since high school, pressed her napkin flat and said nothing. Then he added the word he knew would land. "Useless." He said it lightly, almost smiling, as if he were doing me the favor of naming what everyone else had been too kind to say. I looked at the tree, at the expensive ornaments he liked to brag about, at the wide dining room he still claimed his own hard work had earned, and I realized he had grown so comfortable standing on hidden help that he no longer even checked whether the floor beneath him had my fingerprints on it. My brother, Colin, had spent most of our adult lives performing success. He wore expensive watches, called every purchase an investment, and loved talking about risk as long as somebody else absorbed it first. I took the opposite route. I worked quietly, first in payroll compliance and later as an independent consultant for small businesses that had gotten themselves tangled in tax notices and penalties. It was not glamorous, but it paid steadily. It also taught me how fast a proud man can lose everything once the government stops sending friendly letters and starts sending deadlines. 2 years before that Christmas, Colin's construction company had begun wobbling. He had overextended, ignored withholding deposits, and let a stack of state and federal notices sit unopened on his desk because he did not like feeling managed. His accountant called me, not him. She said the number had crossed $58,000 and liens were close. My first response was no. My second response was also no. Then my mother cried in my kitchen and told me if Colin's business collapsed, he would lose the house, and the children would pay for his ego. So I paid the debt through an attorney escrow account, on one condition. My name stayed out of it until every release was signed. Nobody asked what that payment cost me. It emptied the fund I had built for a smaller condo of my own. It delayed surgery I had been planning on my knee because I kept telling myself one more year of pain would not kill me. It also chained me to silence, because the minute people know you rescued them, they rewrite the rescue as your duty. Colin did exactly what I expected. Once the liens were lifted, he told everyone he had handled some paperwork and gotten aggressive penalties reduced because he was smarter than the system. He said it at backyard cookouts, at my mother's birthday, at church. Once, he even clapped my shoulder and said, "You should learn from me. Panic never solves anything." I remember looking at him and thinking that arrogance is never louder than when it has been secretly subsidized. Still, I kept quiet, mostly for my mother. She hated scenes. And Colin had built his whole identity on being the son who looked successful from the driveway. Christmas should have been easy that year. I brought the bourbon cake my father used to ask for, fixed the loose hinge on the back gate before anyone noticed, and helped my niece wrap the last presents. Colin showed up late in a red cashmere sweater and started narrating his own entrance as if the room were a stage. He complimented the roast, complained about inflation, mocked my old sedan in the driveway, and told his son to study hard unless he wanted to end up freelancing forever. The table took that limp family shape I had seen too often, where everyone feels the wrongness of something but hopes politeness will carry them past it. It never does. Cruel people mistake politeness for permission. By the time he called me useless, I could feel the familiar pressure at the base of my neck. Not rage exactly, more like an old lock turning. There is a point when silence stops being kindness and starts becoming participation. I still might have walked out without a word if Colin had left it there. Instead, he kept going. He said some people spend their lives cleaning up messes because they are too timid to build anything worth protecting. He said it while cutting into a roast purchased with the holiday bonus his company only received because it had remained legally alive. My mother finally whispered, "Enough," but she whispered it to me, not to him, as if my restraint were the only thing in the room that could still be controlled. So I set down my fork and told Colin there was one envelope in my coat pocket that might interest him more than dinner. I did not pull it out. I simply said his accountant had been trying to reach him for 3 weeks because the final acknowledgement from the tax attorney still needed his signature. His face changed by a fraction. Not fear. Recognition. The kind a man shows when a lie he has been living inside brushes up against its paperwork. He tried to recover quickly. He laughed and said I should stop acting like I knew anything about his business. Then he made a mistake only vain people make. He bragged. He said, in front of everyone, that clearing that debt had been the proudest financial move of his life. He called it proof that he could dig himself out of anything. His wife looked up at that. She had clearly believed some version of the story, but not that version. Before I could answer, Colin's phone started buzzing across the table. He ignored it once. It rang again, then again. His son joked that the IRS had come for dessert. Colin snatched the phone, looked at the screen, and stood. I saw the contact name, Marcy Feld, CPA. He turned away to answer, but the dining room had gone still enough for us to hear his half of the conversation. No, I said after the holidays, he muttered. Then more sharply, why would she need my permission? He turned back toward me. Marcy's voice was tinny but clear. Because the payment came from your sister's transfer. Colin, if you want the file fully closed, the donor disclosure release has to be signed. Nobody breathed for a second. My mother closed her eyes. Colin's wife lowered her fork so carefully it almost made more noise than dropping it. My niece looked from her father to me with the confused hurt of someone discovering adulthood is full of forged stories. Colin said Marcy must be mistaken. Marcy, who had no interest in family theatre, said she was looking directly at the transfer receipt, the attorney instructions, and the cleared balance. She asked if he wanted her to email the file again. He ended the call without answering. For the first time in years, he had no performance ready. He stared at me as though I had altered the world unfairly by letting facts exist in it. Then came the question he should have asked 2 years earlier. Why would you do that? Not thank you. Not I am sorry. Why would you do that? I told him because children should not lose their home for their father's pride, and because her mother had already buried one husband and did not deserve to watch her son bury himself in debt while pretending he was too important to read his mail. He tried to turn the moment back in his favor. He said if I had really wanted to help, I would have told him directly. I said I had seen direct help become public ammunition too many times. Quiet help was the only kind he could receive without immediately reshaping it into a story about himself. His wife asked if the amount was really $58,000. I nodded. She covered her mouth. Later she would tell me she had believed the business had a short cash flow issue, not years of neglected payroll taxes. My mother finally looked at Colin with something I had not seen on her face before. Not anger, fatigue. The fatigue of a woman realizing favoritism had protected a grown man's vanity at the expense of the dependable child. Colin sat down hard. Christmas kept going around him in awkward fragments, the ham cooling, the candles burning lower, a child asking in the next room if it was time for presents. I took the envelope out then and placed it beside his plate. On top was the release form. Under it was the wire confirmation with my name on the sending line. I did not ask for an apology. Begged for apologies are rarely worth carrying home. I put on my coat and told my mother I loved her. Colin followed me to the front hall, stripped of all the volume he had worn at dinner. He said he had been under pressure. He said he did not know how to tell people he had failed. He said calling me useless had been a joke that went too far. I told him a joke needs 2 things, surprise and laughter, and he had never managed either. Then I told him the one truth he needed more than my forgiveness. Reliable people are not born into a family. They are used into that role, one emergency at a time, until everybody forgets they were a person first. He stood there with the unsigned form in his hand and finally looked like a man seeing the weight of his own life rather than the costume of it. In January, the signed release arrived with no note. 2 weeks later, a cashier's check came for the first installment of repayment. He never recovered the easy swagger he used to wear around me. At family gatherings, he spoke more carefully, as if language itself had become expensive. The children changed too. They started asking me honest questions about work, taxes, business, the kinds of things their father used to perform knowing. I answered without bitterness. My mother apologized once, quietly, while washing dishes after Sunday lunch. I told her late truth is still truth. Some repairs do not sound dramatic when they happen. A check clears. A tone changes. A chair is offered instead of withheld. That Christmas did not end with shouting. It ended with paper. And in my family, paper had always been the one thing stronger than memory. Later, when I thought back over the whole mess, what stayed with me was not the insult itself but the comfort behind it. Colin spoke that way because the family had learned to use me as a quiet wall. They leaned on me when rent was due, when paperwork arrived, when an elderly relative needed a ride, when a bank letter made somebody nervous. Then, the minute a table was full or a photo was being taken, they acted as if reliability had no face. It was easier for them to enjoy what I carried if they never had to admit who was carrying it. I had spent years making myself useful in ways that never photographed well. I was the person who knew account numbers, pharmacy refill dates, insurance deadlines, and which drawer held the spare key. I was the one who stayed after the guests left and stacked plates in the sink. That kind of labor leaves almost no glamour behind it. People only notice it when it stops. By then, they usually call it a miracle, even though it was ordinary devotion all along. There was another reason I stayed quiet for as long as I did. Public humiliation can tempt a person into public performance. I never wanted that. I did not want to become one more relative shouting across a room, while everyone pretended to be horrified and secretly enjoyed the show. I wanted the truth to arrive in its own clothes, with its own documents, in a voice nobody could accuse me of inventing. That takes patience, and patience rarely looks powerful until the exact second it becomes undeniable. What hurt most was not the money, although the money mattered. It was the casual way my history was erased. Sacrifice sounds noble when strangers talk about it. Inside a family, it often looks like missed weekends, delayed plans, old shoes, unanswered messages from your own life, and the habit of saying, "I can handle it," because nobody else will. By the time a person notices the cost has usually become your personality in other people's eyes. They start calling you available because they have forgotten what you gave up to stay that way. Even after the truth surfaced, I did not feel triumphant in the childish sense. Relief came first, then a sort of clean sadness. Once masks fall, you cannot pretend the old arrangement was harmless. You see exactly who was willing to benefit from your silence, who was willing to laugh while standing on work they never did, and who had trained themselves to confuse kindness with weakness. That knowledge is heavy, but it is also useful. After that day, I never again mistook access for affection. People often imagine justice as a dramatic speech. Real justice is quieter than that. It is a corrected record, a witness with no reason to lie, a signature placed where it always should have been, a number on a page that finally points back to the right name. Once that happens, even the most rehearsed family fiction begins to wobble. It does not always collapse with noise. Sometimes it simply loses the right to keep speaking over the truth. I also learned something uncomfortable about family memory. It is rarely built from the hardest days. It is built from the story told after the hardest day, and the person with the loudest voice usually volunteers to narrate first. That is why I started saving copies, receipts, messages, and names. Not because I enjoy records for their own sake, but because truth inside a family often needs a spine. Otherwise, it gets folded into sentiment and carried away by whichever relative has the confidence to lie beautifully. There were times when I asked myself whether I had made things too easy for everyone. Maybe I had. Competence can become a trap when the people around you start treating it like weather. They expect it. They plan around it. They build their own carelessness into the day because they believe you will step in before the damage reaches anything they truly value. That habit does not begin in one disaster. It begins with 100 small rescues that go unthanked because everyone decides your steadiness is simply who you are. On the outside, scenes like these look sudden. Inside them, nothing is sudden at all. The humiliation at the table, the insult in the lobby, the dismissal in the hallway, the cold tone by the hospital desk, all of it rests on years of practice. Families rehearse hierarchy without admitting they are doing it. One person pours. Another apologizes. Another receives credit. Another is expected to absorb the rough edge because they usually do. By the time the final insult arrives, it feels to the speaker like ordinary speech. That is exactly why the correction lands so hard. I do not pretend I was noble every minute. There were nights when I replayed old conversations and thought of sharper replies. There were mornings when resentment sat on my chest before my feet touched the floor. But anger, if you let it drive, usually spends more than it recovers. I needed something better than a sharp line. I needed the record set straight in a way that would last after the room emptied. That is why I waited, why I kept documents, why I measured my tone even when the other side had done nothing to deserve gentleness. Another thing people rarely mention about being the dependable one is the loneliness of it. When you are the person who can solve the practical problem, others begin speaking to your function instead of your heart. They call because they need a transfer, a ride, a signature, a form, a call back from the bank, a conversation with a nurse, a check sent before 5. Very few of them ask what the accumulation feels like. That silence can distort a person if they are not careful. It can make them grateful for crumbs. I stopped being grateful for crumbs the day the truth finally stood up in my place. In quieter moments afterward, I thought about how much damage can be done by one casual sentence from the wrong mouth. A child hears it and learns who deserves respect. A spouse hears it and decides which family myth to trust. An elder hears it and mistakes dependence for authority. Language arranges furniture inside a house long before anybody notices the room feels wrong. Perhaps that is why it mattered so much to hear the correction spoken clearly. One honest line from the right witness can undo years of bad arrangement. If there was any comfort in the whole ordeal, it came from this. People can ignore sacrifice while it is happening, but they cannot completely erase the marks it leaves behind. Someone at the bank remembers who called. Someone at the hospital remembers who signed. Someone at the care home remembers whose card number was on file. Someone in the family notices who arrives early and leaves late. Those details seem small until the day they join together and form the only version of the story strong enough to survive daylight.